Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Back in 2004, I was working for government security on secondment with county police. Not exactly a desk job. I was 6'2", about 320 pounds, and built like a tank from my military days. The work kept me in shape, and honestly, I looked the part. Shaved head, goatee, tactical gear. People definitely noticed when I walked into a room. My buddy ran this little cafe downtown. Nice place, family friendly, mostly regulars who knew each other. He'd been managing it for a few years and was pretty well liked in the neighborhood. The cafe had this welcoming atmosphere where young mothers would bring their kids, office workers would grab lunch, and everyone felt comfortable. It was midsummer, brutally hot with one of those heat waves that made you want to stay indoors. I'd finished work early and swung by the cafe around 4 p.m. to meet my friend. We had plans to head back to his place, maybe catch up over some cold drinks and air conditioning. I got there a bit early, so I grabbed a bagel and something cold to drink while I waited for him to finish his shift. I was sitting in this corner spot, kind of tucked behind the front door, where nobody really noticed me. Just minding my own business, eating my bagel, listening to whatever was playing on the radio. The heat was making everyone a bit sluggish, and the cafe had that lazy afternoon feel to it. I started hearing voices getting louder across the room. Not quite shouting yet, but definitely heading in that direction. I looked up from my food and saw my friend behind the counter talking to this woman. She was the one getting loud, waving her arms around, and clearly upset about something. At first, I figured it was just another customer complaint. My friend had plenty of experience dealing with difficult people, and I wasn't about to jump in unless he needed help. Besides, it wasn't my cafe, and sometimes these things work themselves out. I settled back to watch what I thought would be a quick resolution. But then I started really listening to what was being said, and it became clear this wasn't going away quietly. Karen started complaining that the quality of service was terrible and completely unacceptable. My friend told her that their regular customers would disagree with her assessment. She got even more upset and insisted that she was a regular customer who came in all the time. My friend told her that he'd never seen her before. She shot back that she'd never seen him before either, and that the service today was awful. She couldn't understand why anyone would come to a place like this. My friend explained that she'd received the same service as everyone else and that she couldn't have a free bottle. She demanded to know why other tables had bottles when hers didn't. He told her that anyone with a bottle had paid for it and that the counter staff would be happy to help her if she wanted one. She got even more worked up and asked if he was telling her they didn't do table service. She wanted to speak to the manager immediately and called him a terrible servant. Yeah, she said servant. I could see my friend's face change from patient to somewhere between annoyed and amused. The other customers were starting to pay attention too, and I recognized a few of the regular faces. They all knew my friend was the manager. My friend explained that he wasn't her servant, and that they didn't take orders at tables, but they would bring prepared orders to customers. He asked her to go to the counter if she wanted a bottle. He started to turn away to get back to work. She screamed at him, asking how he dared to turn his back on her. The word dare came out at a pitch that could have shattered glass. Everyone in the cafe was staring now. She demanded to see the manager right away and threatened to have him fired and thrown out on the street. My friend turned back with this big grin and told her that he was the manager. A few of the regulars chuckled at that. They all knew he owned the place and had been running it for years, but Karen wasn't having it. She looked at his tattoos and said it was nonsense. She called him a liar and said that no one would make someone who looked like a thug into a manager. She demanded to speak to his boss or get his phone number immediately. My friend had clearly had enough. He told her she was being annoying and that he had no interest in having her in his establishment. He asked her to collect her things and leave. She refused to go anywhere and said she was going to have him fired. She insisted that he couldn't kick her out. This went back and forth for several minutes. She was refusing to leave, getting more worked up by the second, and my friend was trying his best to handle it diplomatically. The whole cafe was watching now, and I could see some people getting uncomfortable. Then I heard it, that little gasping sound that happens right before a baby starts crying. There was a young mother sitting not far from me, and her kid had been woken up by all the shouting. The baby was getting upset, and the mother was trying to calm him down, while Karen just kept getting louder and more incoherent. My friend looked over at the mother and baby, then at me. I could see the screw-it expression on his face. He told Karen that if she didn't leave right now, force would be used to remove her from the premises. Her shouting was disturbing the regular customers, and he didn't want her in his establishment. She insisted that he couldn't force her to go anywhere because it was a public place. She said she wasn't leaving until she spoke to his boss. My friend looked at me again and just nodded. He pointed at Karen, then pointed at the door. Message received. I stood up. Now I should mention that I was still wearing some of my work gear, tactical vest with plates, communications equipment, handcuffs, the works. It wasn't common to see someone dressed like me in our quiet little city, so I definitely stood out. I started walking over to Karen, and I could see some of the regulars smiling because they had a pretty good idea what was about to happen. I told Karen that I needed her attention. She turned around, and there was this almost comedic moment where she found herself staring at my chest and had to tilt her head way back to look at my face. She went completely silent, trying to process what she was seeing. I explained that the manager had asked her repeatedly to leave the premises and that her loud voice had disturbed the child and probably the other customers too. Since the manager had made his position clear, she needed to leave. I told her to collect her things and get out. She asked what was happening and who I was. I pulled out my ID from my tactical vest and told her that right now I was just a concerned citizen who had been asked by the manager to help her leave the premises. I told her to pick up her bag and start walking. She said I couldn't make her go anywhere and that she didn't care who I thought I was. She insisted that she hadn't spoken to the real manager yet and wasn't going anywhere. I promised her that he really was the manager and asked her one last time to leave voluntarily. I warned her that if she refused, I would use force and she would be removed. She threatened to have me charged with assault if I laid my hands on her, saying I couldn't touch a lady. I asked her if she was completely refusing to leave. She asked if I hadn't heard what she just said. That was all the answer I needed. I moved behind her, took her left arm, bent it at the elbow with the back of her hand towards her neck, hooked my arm under her armpit, and applied pressure to bend her forward. I grabbed her bag with my free hand and started walking her toward the door. My friend was already there holding the door open. I got her out onto the sidewalk, quickly let her go, placed her bag on the ground in front of her, and stepped back into the doorway. Karen shook her arm, looked bewildered for a moment, then just snapped. She jumped straight at me and started clawing at my face. The first couple of hits caught me completely off guard, and I realized pretty quickly that her nails were really sharp. It took a few minutes to get her under control again. I ended up with her on the ground, using my leg to pin her against the wall of the cafe while keeping my face and torso away from her. I was having a moment of, well, this wasn't what I'd planned for the afternoon. She was screaming bloody murder now, and since it was such a hot day, there were plenty of people around. We were definitely drawing a crowd. I asked her if she would leave now if I lit her up. She was still trying to claw at my leg, but my heavy-duty work pants were taking most of the sting out of her nails. She told me I had assaulted her and started screaming for someone to call the police. She started punching my shin, which honestly wasn't doing much damage. I told her that sure we could get the police involved, and I was sure the manager would love to discuss the situation with them. I grabbed my communications equipment and called for backup from the station about a mile away. They said 5 minutes. Fine, I could wait. I left the channel open so the incoming officers could hear everything that was happening. I told Karen that police were coming and offered to let her up if she wanted to leave so we could all go on with our day peacefully. She was still trying to hit my leg, though I'd eased up the pressure so she wasn't in pain. She probably could have gotten up if she'd tried, but she wasn't thinking clearly at this point. She said she knew people and had friends, and that her husband would deal with me. I just said sure. My friend asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine and that uniforms were coming. I asked if everything was okay inside. He said it was, just that the baby was making noise. I said that was cool. I could hear a siren in the distance, working its way through traffic. Karen got excited and said the police were coming for me and that I was going to jail. I just said, uh-huh. The police car pulled up and the passenger got out first. He looked at me, went a bit pale, then went straight to Karen and started putting handcuffs on her. The driver got out and came around. I knew him from work. The officer asked if something didn't hurt, and I asked what he meant. I said she wasn't hitting that hard. He said no, he meant my face. I asked what about my face. The other officer had Karen cuffed and in the back of the car by now. My friend turned me around so I could see my reflection in the cafe window. I realized my face was really hurting. Turns out her first attack had gouged 4 solid strips into my left cheek, maybe half an inch below my eye, and it was bleeding pretty steadily down my chin. I honestly hadn't noticed because of the adrenaline. My friend came out to meet the police and saw my face. He said it looked really sore. I told him it definitely was. The officer asked about charges. Karen ended up taking a plea deal without going to court. Turns out this was just the latest in a long series of petty infractions. She got 18 months for assault. I got 4 mild scars that only really show up when I get a tan. What had started this whole thing in the first place was that the cafe was putting jugs of iced water at every table because of the heat wave. They also had liter bottles of fizzy water in a chiller that customers could buy if they wanted something different. Karen had seen the bottles on other tables and just assumed they were free, so she'd lost her mind over the fact that her table didn't have one. I'm a 21-year-old guy, pretty average height, at about 180 centimeters. I work part-time at a tech repair shop while studying computer science at university. I usually mind my own business, but I have a few things that really set me off. I absolutely hate when strangers touch me without permission, and I can't stand people who think they can push others around just because they feel entitled. Most of the time I keep to myself, but if someone really pushes me, I'm not afraid to stand up for myself. The reason I was at this particular grocery store was because my roommate had asked me to pick up some specific ingredients for dinner. He was making his grandmother's traditional German recipe and needed some items that weren't available at the bigger chain stores. This place was one of those smaller, family-owned shops that you still find all over Germany. They don't have security guards or anything like that, just a few employees and the manager. I had been shopping for about 15 minutes, filling up my cart with various items including the stuff my roommate needed, some snacks for myself, and groceries for the week. I was wearing my favorite cargo shorts and an old concert shirt, definitely not looking like someone who worked there. My cart was pretty full with all kinds of random stuff that no employee would be carrying around. I was in the cereal aisle trying to decide between 2 different brands when I heard this overly sweet voice behind me. A middle-aged woman politely called out to me, addressing me as young man. I turned around and saw this woman, a bit shorter than me, with this fake smile that immediately put me on edge. Something about her whole attitude screamed trouble. She had this entitled look in her eyes and was standing way too close to me. I asked her if she was looking for something, trying to be helpful. She then asked me to go fetch pasta sauce for her, saying it like it was the most normal thing in the world. She said it like I was supposed to drop everything and serve her. I've never seen grocery store employees act like personal shoppers here. Usually they just point you in the right direction and you get your own stuff. I politely told her that I didn't work there but explained that she could find pasta sauce in aisle 3. I tried to smile and turned back to my shopping. After taking maybe 3 steps, I heard heavy footsteps stomping after me. When I heard what came out of her mouth next, I was shocked. She started yelling at me, calling me worthless, and using the German word that the Nazis used, which is absolutely unacceptable here. That word is completely taboo in Germany for obvious historical reasons. She screamed that I was there to serve her. Then she grabbed my shoulder. That was it. That was the moment she crossed every single line I have. Nobody touches me without permission, and nobody gets to use that kind of language around me. I spun around and knocked her hand away from my shoulder. I told her not to touch me and to keep her hands to herself. She started to interrupt me, but I kept going. I hate being interrupted almost as much as I hate being grabbed by strangers. I told her to shut up because I wasn't finished talking. I called her out on the Nazi terminology and said she needed to stop with that language. I explained that, even if I did work there, she had no right to verbally abuse workers and treat them like slaves. I told her to do her shopping herself. I raised my voice when she tried to cut me off again. There was no way I was letting her steamroll over me. She then had the nerve to act offended that I had touched her hand to push it away. She told me to learn some respect and said I should help out a single mother. She whined that it was hard enough for her, so she deserved some nice things. I looked around but didn't see any kid with her. I have no idea why she was playing the single mother card. I shot back that getting pregnant and then dumped by a guy didn't exactly sound like an achievement to me, and it certainly didn't mean that I had to cater to her needs when I had other things to do. Her face turned bright red and she started sputtering like a fish out of water. I could practically see steam coming out of her ears. She stammered that she was still my elder and that I should have respect and do as she said. She demanded that I be grateful for my elders. I told her that she certainly looked like a mummy, but that didn't mean I had to treat her with respect. I said she obviously didn't deserve it, and that it was ridiculous she thought I owed her anything. At this point, the whole thing had shifted from her thinking I was an employee to her believing I was somehow obligated to be her personal servant. It was completely insane. That's when the manager appeared around the corner. I was actually surprised she hadn't screamed for one earlier. The manager asked what the problem was. Karen immediately launched into this unhinged rant about how I should be fired for being a worthless human being. But she didn't stop there. She literally told the manager that I should not only be fired but should be put down like a rabid animal. The manager and I just stared at each other. The manager told her that I didn't work there, but she wasn't having it. She kept insisting that I should be her personal slave for whatever twisted reason. The manager and I shared another look like we were both wondering if we were dealing with someone who had completely lost touch with reality. Finally, I'd had enough. I warned her that if she didn't leave me alone right now, I would call the police. I told her that I was going to leave. I started walking away slowly, and I could hear the manager and Karen still arguing behind me. Then I heard the manager's voice get firm. He told her that if she didn't leave the store right now, he was calling the police. He told her that she was no longer welcome there, ever. That's when I heard this loud crash. I turned around to see that Karen had flipped her entire shopping cart over in a rage. Cans and boxes were scattered everywhere across the floor. She walked out of the store while the manager called for his cleaning staff to deal with the mess she'd made. I finished my shopping in peace and checked out normally. The manager even gave me a small discount and apologized for the whole situation. He said he'd never seen anything quite like it in 20 years of running the store. The whole thing was completely surreal. I still can't believe someone would act that way over being politely told that a random customer doesn't work at the store. I moved into this homeowners association community 3 years ago thinking I'd finally found my slice of suburban paradise. The houses were nice, the fees were reasonable, and the neighbors seemed friendly enough. What I didn't know was that our homeowners association board was run by a bunch of idiots who thought they could bend reality to their will. The trouble started when I noticed some surveyors poking around the western edge of our community property. They had those orange flags and were measuring things, which never means anything good. I asked one of them what was going on and he just shrugged and told me someone was checking property lines. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail that made my blood run cold. We were being sued by the owners of the property next to us. Apparently, our community fence and about a strip of land we all thought was ours actually belonged to them. The builders who developed our neighborhood had screwed up royally and put the fence in the wrong place. The board president called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. She was this middle-aged woman who loved throwing around legal terms she clearly didn't understand. She told everyone to stay calm and said this was just a misunderstanding that could be worked out. I asked her how exactly this was a misunderstanding if the land wasn't ours, and she explained that we'd been maintaining that land for 15 years and that had to count for something legally. The treasurer, an older guy who wore the same golf shirt to every meeting, chimed in next. He said he'd been researching adverse possession laws, and if we could prove we'd been using the land openly and continuously, we might have a case. I raised my hand to speak, but the board president ignored me. She was too busy explaining her brilliant legal strategy to anyone who would listen. She announced that we were going to fight this because these people were just trying to take advantage of us. I asked what would happen if we lost, and she confidently told me we wouldn't lose and to trust her. Famous last words. 6 months later, we lost spectacularly. The judge ruled that the land never belonged to us and gave us 90 days to remove our fence and get off their property. The property owners had documentation going back decades proving their ownership, while we had nothing but wishful thinking. After the court ruling, I expected the board to spring into action. We had 90 days to move a fence and reset the area. It seemed straightforward enough, even if it was going to be expensive, but the board had other ideas. At the next meeting, their plan became clear. The board president explained that we weren't going to rush into anything because fence prices were really high right now because of supply chain issues. I pointed out that we had a court order and couldn't just ignore it, but she said we had time to figure this out since the judge said 90 days, not immediately. The treasurer nodded along like this made perfect sense. He said he'd been watching the market, and if we waited a few more months, prices should come down significantly. I asked what would happen when the 90 days were up, and the board president said we'd cross that bridge when we came to it. The 90 days came and went. Nothing happened. The board hired surveyors to come out and mark the correct property line, which cost us $2,000. But they didn't actually do anything with that information. I started getting nervous about the legal implications of ignoring a court order, but when I brought it up at meetings, the board president had a new theory. She said she'd been thinking about this differently and wondered what would happen if whoever bought that western property decided to develop it. They'd probably want to put up a nice masonry wall anyway. I told her that wasn't how property disputes worked, and we couldn't just hope someone else would fix our problem. She said I was being too negative and that sometimes these things work out better than you expect. The treasurer had his own brilliant addition to this fantasy. He suggested that if someone did buy that 6-acre parcel, maybe they'd be willing to sell us back our little strip of land. I asked if that was an option. Didn't they think it would have come up during the lawsuit? The board president said not necessarily, explaining that the previous owners might not have wanted to deal with subdividing, but a new owner might see it differently. These people were gambling with everyone's money and potentially putting us all at legal risk because they couldn't accept that they had lost. When months went by, I kept expecting the other shoe to drop. The property owners had been patient during the original lawsuit, but ignoring a court order was different. I started researching what happens when homeowners associations don't comply with legal judgments, and it wasn't pretty. Finally, almost 6 months after the original deadline, I got the call I'd been dreading. The property owners were taking us back to court for contempt and asking for additional damages. The board president called another emergency meeting, but this time she looked a lot less confident. She told everyone we'd received some correspondence from the property owners' attorneys who were claiming we hadn't complied with the court order. I said the obvious, that we hadn't complied with the court order. She insisted we'd been working on it and that the surveyors had marked the line. I explained that marking the line wasn't the same as moving the fence. The treasurer tried to salvage the situation by suggesting maybe we could negotiate something and offer them a payment plan or something. I told him they didn't want a payment plan and they wanted their land back. The board president said I didn't understand the complexities of the situation. I replied that I understood they'd ignored a court order for 6 months and now we were going to get sued again. The second lawsuit was even worse than the first. Not only did we have to pay to move the fence immediately, but we also had to pay the property owners legal fees and additional damages for contempt of court. The total cost ended up being 3 times what it would have been if we'd just complied with the original order. Then came watching the board president try to explain to the homeowners at the next meeting why everyone's fees were going up to cover the legal costs. She said that, unfortunately, the property owners were unreasonable in their demands for immediate compliance. I asked if she meant they expected us to follow a court order, and she said the important thing was that we'd resolve the situation now. One homeowner asked why we didn't just move the fence 6 months ago. The board president explained that these kinds of property disputes were very complex and they had to explore all their options. I pointed out that our options were to move the fence or ignore the court order and get sued again, and she'd chosen wrong. The board president looked at me like I was the problem, but she couldn't argue with the facts. Her brilliant strategy of waiting and hoping had cost everyone in the community thousands of dollars in additional fees. The fence finally got moved 8 months after the original court order. The property owners put up a nice wooden fence on the correct property line, which we all get to look at while paying off the legal bills from the board's incompetence. The board president resigned quietly a few months later, probably hoping everyone would forget about her role in the fiasco. But I'll always remember her when I think about what happens when someone thinks they can outsmart property law and ends up costing everyone a fortune in the process. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.